America's deadliest maritime disaster didn't happen at sea. It happened on a river on a spring night in 1865 when a crowded paddle-wheel steamboat named the SS Sultana blew apart on the Mississippi, just north of Memphis. The war had basically ended, the fighting was over, the passengers were Union soldiers finally going home, and in a few terrible minutes almost 1,200 of them were gone. Picture the Mississippi after the Civil War, high water from spring floods, currents muscling past muddy banks, trees and driftwood whipping along like spears. Steamboats, those tall, white, wedding cake stacks of decks, were the highway system of the day. They moved people, cotton, mail, livestock, everything. And a big, glamorous steamer like Sultana was a floating hotel with engines. The Sultana was built for comfort and speed, not for cramming in thousands of people. On paper, she was rated to carry a few hundred passengers, give or take, plus crew and some cargo. But April 1865 was not on paper. The country was staggering out of a 4-year nightmare. Lincoln had been assassinated on April 14th. Robert E. Lee had surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia on April 9th. Union prisoner of war camps in the South were emptying, and paroled soldiers, paroled meaning released with conditions on their honor not to fight anymore, were desperate to get north to their families. The army paid steamboat owners per soldier transported. That created a perverse incentive: more bodies, more money. And on the Mississippi, where everyone knew everyone, deals got made. The quartermasters in charge of booking passage, army officers handling logistics like tickets, rations and cargo, had the power to choose which boat got the contract. Suddenly, a steamboat captain's future could swing on handshakes, favours and envelopes. Sultana's captain, like many river captains, wanted that contract. He got it. What followed was a classic American tragedy, a chain of small compromises and obvious warnings, ignored because people wanted to move fast and make money. Down in Vicksburg, Mississippi, the Sultana began taking on paroled Union soldiers from camps like Andersonville and Cahaba. These men were gaunt and exhausted, some still sick from starvation and disease. They made jokes, they sang, but their faces were paper thin. If they could just get home, everything would be okay. Sultana's legal capacity, a few hundred. The number of soldiers loaded, over 2,000. Contemporary estimates vary, and historians argue the exact count, but picture this. The decks bow under the weight. Railings press into bodies. Every stairwell jammed. People wedge so tightly that sleeping or sitting means bargaining for a plank of floor. There's a famous photo taken while Sultana paused upriver, soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, a human forest of faces. It looks impossible. Let's talk about the machinery under all that weight. Sultana had 4 long tubular boilers. Think of iron barrels laid horizontally and linked side by side. They were fire tube boilers. Hot gases from the furnace ran through tubes inside the water. The water boils, becomes steam. Steam drives the engines turn the paddle wheel. It's proven tech for the day, but it demands discipline. Boilers need careful water levels, too low, and the top of the iron is dry and overheats. A sudden slosh that splashes water back on those red hot spots can flash it to steam and spike the pressure. That's how you get a shock load, a pressure hammer out of nowhere. There were other stresses. The river was high and swift that April, which can cause a boat to roll and sway more than usual. The Sultana was carrying not only people but also cargo, barrels, animals, all kinds of freight. So the load wasn't perfectly balanced. Imagine a double-decker bus going fast around curves on a slick road. Now make it 3 or 4 buses stacked, then put them on a floating log. That was the Sultana. Somewhere in this rush, one boiler was already suspect. Leaking and bulged, the iron plate pushed out like a hernia. A boilermaker reportedly recommended a proper fix, cut out and replace the bad section. That would take time. Time meant losing some of the lucrative soldier traffic to competing boats. So a faster patch was done, hammer back the bulge, add a sleeve or a strap, call it good enough, and get underway. The journey upriver rolled on. Soldiers crammed every railing and stair. The paddle wheel shivered the hull. The The boilers sang their low iron song, and every hour firemen shoveled coal. The engines thumped, ropes creaked, and the Mississippi pushed back. At Memphis, late on April 26th, Sultana made a stop, took on coal, dropped some cargo, and kept moving. Memphis to Cairo, Illinois was the plan. From there, rail could carry the men toward Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, back to farms and towns where parents and sweethearts were counting days on a calendar. Some of the soldiers wrote letters home right there, telling their families, "We're on the river, we'll be home soon." Some were still teenagers. It was just after 2 a.m., April 27, 1865. The river air was cold, fog strung along the banks like gauze torn on tree branches. The high water ran fast. Most of the soldiers were sleeping, if you can call it sleep, stacked in rows, huddled for warmth, some up against the boilers themselves. And then the boilers let go. Witnesses described it as a roar that instantly erased everything else. Wind, river, voices, followed by a shower of iron and fire that turned night into day. 3 of the 4 boilers were blown apart in a domino effect. The 4th may have ruptured moments later. The blast punched straight up through the decks. Timbers shattered. Hot coals sprayed over crowded woodwork. Steam scalded anyone within reach. The tall, elegant smokestacks toppled like trees, smashing crowds below. In the chaos, flames took the wood decks in seconds. On the open river, in the dark, with decks aflame and the boat sagging, a choice confronted every survivor: burn or jump into black water. Most couldn't swim. Remember, this is the 1860s. Swimming lessons weren't part of most lives, especially for farm boys from the Midwest. The Mississippi was wide and powerful and freezing cold. The current grabbed whatever it could, people, barrels, crates, chunks of the boat, and spun them off into darkness. Imagine the sounds: people calling names, officers shouting orders no one could follow, the crackle and pop of fire, the hiss of steam escaping smashed boiler seams, a paddle wheel still turning for a few ghostly seconds, then stopping as the machinery tore itself apart, and beneath it, the steady, indifferent rush of the river. There were heroes, crewmen and soldiers who cut free skiffs, little boats, threw doors and barrels overboard to use as rafts, and hauled strangers into the water with them. Some men wrapped themselves in wet blankets and tried to beat back the flames so others could get past. Riverfolk on the Arkansas and Tennessee banks, farmers, fishermen, woke to the explosion, hitched up skiffs, and set out into the smoky dark with nothing but lanterns and grit. Other steamers nearby responded, racing toward the glow on the waterline, but the cold did its killing. Steam burned scalded skin that the river then numbed. Survivors clung to anything that floated. Some sang hymns to stay awake. Some called out for mothers. A few stronger swimmers pushed others toward driftwood. Some men drifted for hours, bumped by logs, spun by eddies. By dawn, the river had a long, ugly trail of survivors and bodies spread across miles. The burned remains of the Sultana drifted and sank. Memphis became a frantic hospital, their city docks filling with boats carrying piles of shivering, soot-blackened men. Citizens opened homes, churches rolled out blankets. Doctors used up everything they had and then started improvising. The city smelled like smoke and river mud. How many died? We say about 1,200. And that's the number you'll hear most often, but the exact count is complicated. The passenger list was unreliable. Who could even write it down in a crush like that? Some recruits hopped aboard without paperwork. Others were counted twice. It's safe to say, over 1,000, making it worse than the Titanic by raw loss of life. Many of the dead were veterans who had survived bullets, disease, starvation, and prison camps, only to die within sight of safe harbours. That's the heartbreak of the Sultana. Why did it happen? The simplest answer is also the hardest to accept. Greed, hurry, and bad engineering practice combined. First, the boat was insanely overcrowded. A deck is like a springy bridge. Load it too heavily and it sags. On a riverboat, that sag can change how the hull sits in the water, tilting a few degrees one way or another. Tilt affects boiler water levels. Boilers aren't just big buckets. Water inside them needs to cover the tops of the fire tubes and metal plates. If the boat rolls even a little, water sloshes, exposed iron overheats. Then when water splashes back over those hot spots, it flashes to steam, sudden pressure. Think of heating a frying pan bone dry, then tossing a spoonful of water on it. That explosive sizzle, multiplied by tons of steel and thousands of gallons of superheated water. Second, the prior boiler damage and the quick and dirty repair. Hot iron that's been bulged and hammered is like a paper clip bent back and forth. It gets weak. The repair that would have taken the boat out of commission for a while was the safer choice. Not taking it was like skipping a brake job because you're late for work. You might be fine, until you're not. Third, the river itself. High water increases turbulence. A boat fights harder to hold a course, the wheel spins faster, and crews often push engines to maintain schedule. If the engineers were juggling low water levels in the boilers, either to save fuel or because the gauge readings were misleading while the boat rolled, the risk climbs. Fourth, incentives. Profit was per head. Oversight was lax. The army wanted the problem, moving thousands of men off their hands. The captain wanted to make money and perhaps sincerely believed the boat could handle it if they moved quickly and carefully. Quartermasters wanted to finish their job yesterday. Every person told themselves it would be all right. That's how disasters often happen. A long line of "it'll be fine." In the days after, there were investigations. Fingers pointed in every direction, at the boat's owners, at corrupt officials who booked the overcrowding, at the boiler inspector who signed off on the repairs, at the captain's decisions. Amid the paperwork, the grief was the only constant. Bodies surfaced downriver for weeks. Families in Ohio and Indiana and Michigan got letters that didn't make sense. Your son survived Andersonville and was paroled. And then a second letter that said he was lost on a boat they'd never heard of in a disaster they wouldn't see in the headlines. And here's another twist of fate. The story vanished under larger news. The country was still stunned by Lincoln's death. John Wilkes Booth, his assassin, was tracked down and killed on April 26th, just hours before Sultana exploded. Newspapers filled their front pages with the hunt, the capture, the mourning. A riverboat disaster, even a massive one, slid to the inside pages, then slid off the pages completely. The Civil War had produced too many lists of the dead for one more to stand out. But the Sultana mattered, and still does, for a few reasons. First, it shows how a peacetime problem, transportation, can still carry wartime consequences. The men on that boat were casualties of a system that hadn't shaken off the war's habits: hurry, improvisation, and a tolerance for loss. Second, it's a lesson in engineering humility. Boats, bridges, planes, machines do exactly what physics tells them to do, not what our schedules want them to do. Water levels, pressure, metal fatigue, these aren't suggestions, they're laws. When we cheat them to save time or money, we place a bet against reality. Third, it's a human story. The survivors talked for the rest of their lives about the moment the sky turned to fire. Some never went near deep water again. Some wrote memoirs testifying to the kindness of Memphis families who took them in. Others helped raise markers and monuments so the dead would not stay lost. At reunions for years afterward, a group of Sultana survivors would gather, their numbers dwindling, telling and retelling the moments when a stranger's hand hauled them into a skiff, or a floating door kept their chin above water long enough for dawn. If you're making a trip today, you can stand near where it happened. On the Arkansas side of the river, opposite Memphis, there's farmland and quiet now. The river has shifted its course. In a century and a half, the Mississippi reshapes itself like a giant snake shedding skin, but the disaster's approximate stretch can still be traced. Locals will tell you stories handed down from great-grandparents who rode into the dark that night with lanterns. Whenever we talk about the Sultana, someone asks, could something like that happen today? In that exact way? No, not on a modern regulated passenger vessel in the United States. Boiler technology changed, materials, designs, safety valves, and so did the rules. We learned the hard way across many disasters that capacity limits and maintenance aren't suggestions, they're lifelines. But the broader pattern, pressure to hurry, to cut corners, to assume it'll be fine, that pattern never really goes away. It just puts on new clothes in new industries. So the Sultana's echo is less about a specific machine and more about a human reflex. When the pressure's on, do we do the right thing slowly or the risky thing fast? On the Mississippi in 1865, with a boat sagging under 2,000 homesick men, the risky thing fast won, and the river did the rest. America's deadliest maritime disaster happened not in an ocean storm, but on a river in the calm between wars, in a moment when people were finally trying to go home. Maybe that's why it still stings. We expect danger in battle, we don't expect it on the way back. When you hear the name Sultana, remember this. Safety isn't a switch you flip after the crisis ends. It's a discipline you keep, especially when you're tired, especially when you're sure you can get away with less. The river doesn't bargain, physics doesn't forgive, and the cost of crossing your fingers and hoping is written in the cold water north of Memphis, where a boat full of survivors never made it home.